All right, so today we're diving deep into Alibaba Group Holding Limited.
Yeah, always a fascinating one.
Definitely. You're probably here because you want to get a grip on this massive business, right?
hmm
Where are they focusing their energy and how's it all playing out? We're going to break it down using their fiscal year 2024 annual report as our guide.
It's a great roadmap for understanding this company.
For sure. And what makes Alibaba so interesting is they're not just an e-commerce giant anymore.
Oh, absolutely. They've branched out big time.
Yeah, they've got their hands in cloud computing, logistics, even digital media.
A real tech conglomerate.
So the annual report starts with a super helpful chart that lays out their business segments. It's like a bird's eye view of this massive ecosystem.
It's a good way to visualize it all.
It really is. Where do you think we should jump in first?
Well, their bread and butter, and still a huge chunk of their business, is their China commerce retail segment.
Right. And at the heart of that are Taobao and Tmall.
Those are the names everyone knows, the undisputed kings of Chinese online shopping.
Exactly. But what's interesting is the report emphasizes that they're much more than just marketplaces.
Right, they're constantly evolving.
They are. There's actually a really insightful anecdote about a woman named Min Q who founded a handmade women's shoe company called Gifei.
Oh, I remember that story. She was struggling with traditional distribution, long payment cycles, inventory issues, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, all the classic headaches for a small business. Then she starts using Taobao's live streaming feature.
And it's a game changer for her business.
Totally. Suddenly she's able to engage directly with customers, showcasing her craftsmanship and offering better prices because she's cut out the middleman.
A perfect example of how Alibaba empowers these small businesses to thrive.
It really is a win-win for her and the consumer.
And it speaks to Alibaba's larger strategy of creating a platform for others to succeed.
But their ambitions extend far beyond China. That's where the Alibaba International Digital Commerce Group comes into play.
Now, this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, tell me more.
Well, first, you've got Alibaba.com, the original B2B marketplace. It's been connecting global businesses with Chinese suppliers for decades.
Right, it's like the granddaddy of online wholesale.
Then you've got their strategic acquisitions like Trendyol, which has become a major e-commerce player in Turkey.
Trendyol really stood out to me in the report. What's the secret sauce behind their success?
It seems like they've really cracked the code on logistics in densely populated areas.
Oh, how so?
They've set up localized warehouses and partnered with local businesses for last-mile delivery. It's all about speed and efficiency.
So they're tailoring their approach to the specific needs of each market.
Exactly. Not just trying to copy and paste what works elsewhere.
That's smart. And they're actually beating Amazon in some areas on delivery times.
Which is pretty impressive considering Amazon's reputation.
For sure. Then, of course, there's Lazada, a dominant force in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, they've got a massive user base there.
And they're continuing to expand into new territories with Daraz in South Asia and Moravia in Spain.
A real global push.
So they've got all these platforms selling stuff, but getting it to customers efficiently is a whole other challenge. That's where Cainiao's Smart Logistics Network comes in.
Right, their logistics arm. It's crucial to their overall strategy.
They're aiming for delivery within 24 hours in China and 72 hours globally.
Talk about ambitious goals.
Right. It's a massive undertaking.
But what's really innovative is their hybrid model. They've got their own fleet of vehicles and warehouses, but they also collaborate with tons of local partners.
So it's a mix of centralized control and decentralized execution.
Exactly. It allows them to scale rapidly while maintaining quality and reliability.
It's almost like they're building a global delivery network that's both centralized and decentralized at the same time.
And that ties directly into their growth strategy. They're obsessed with controlling the entire consumer experience, from browsing to purchasing to delivery.
Making it as seamless as possible.
And they're investing heavily in technology to make it happen.
But it's not just about e-commerce, right? Alibaba's Cloud Intelligence Group is another major piece of the puzzle.
Oh, absolutely. They're a force to be reckoned with in the cloud computing space.
They're not only one of the largest cloud providers globally, but they're also pushing the boundaries with AI.
Yeah, their proprietary large language model, Tangi Quanwen, is a game changer.
It really is. They're integrating it into everything, from search to customer service.
Making their platforms even smarter and more efficient.
What I find particularly interesting is that they're not keeping this technology to themselves. They're offering Tangi Quanwen to enterprise clients on the cloud, allowing them to build their own customized AI solutions.
It's a savvy move. They're positioning themselves not just as a cloud provider, but as an AI enabler.
It's a brilliant way to expand their reach and influence.
And it plays into their larger strategy of being a platform for other businesses to thrive.
Okay, so we've seen the breadth of Alibaba's empire, but what are the key strategies driving their growth? The report keeps mentioning a multi-tiered approach, which sounds a bit vague.
Yeah, it's a bit of a buzzword, but essentially it means they're catering to all types of consumers across various price points.
So think of it like a department store, but online.
Exactly. You've got your luxury brands on Tmall, your everyday essentials on Taobao, and everything in between.
So they're casting a wide net, making sure they have something for everyone,
But with competition heating up, how do they stay ahead on price? That's the key question.
especially in a market as price-sensitive as China.
Well, this is where scale becomes their biggest advantage. Alibaba's sheer size allows them to negotiate favorable terms with suppliers, optimize their supply chains, and ultimately offer competitive prices.
It's the classic bigger is better approach, but they seem to be executing it effectively.
And Cainiao plays a critical role here.
Right, their logistics network helps keep those costs down and ensure fast, reliable delivery.
They're investing heavily in automation and AI-powered route optimization to make their logistics operations even more efficient.
And they're not just focused on profits. The report highlights their commitment to ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors.
Yeah, sustainability is becoming increasingly important for businesses.
Absolutely. They've set a goal of achieving carbon neutrality in their operations by 2030.
A bold target, but it shows they're taking it seriously.
They're also focusing on empowering small and medium-sized businesses, or MSMEs, which are the backbone of any economy.
They're providing MSMEs with access to cutting-edge technologies like ModelScope, their platform with a vast library of pre-trained AI models.
It's about leveling the playing field and helping these smaller businesses compete in the digital age.
Creating a more inclusive ecosystem while also nurturing potential future giants.
And it's not all sunshine and roses, right? The report acknowledges some pretty significant challenges ahead.
Oh, there are definitely headwinds.
Like what?
Well, competition is fierce, especially in China's internet sector. You've got established players like Tencent and JD.com, as well as a constant stream of new startups trying to disrupt the market.
So they can't afford to rest on their laurels.
And then there are the geopolitical risks. Trade tensions, regulatory hurdles, the constant shadow of U.S.-China relations looming over everything.
Those are some serious factors to consider.
And then there's the issue of platform liability.
Right. As they grow, they face increased scrutiny over everything from product safety to content moderation.
It's the price of being a dominant platform.
So while they've built this incredible empire, Alibaba clearly isn't immune to these external pressures.
It'll be interesting to see how they navigate these challenges moving forward.
Absolutely. So next, we'll dive into their financials to see if they have the firepower to weather these storms ahead.
Sounds good. Let's crunch some numbers. Okay, so let's crack open Alibaba's books and see what their financials tell us.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty. We've talked about their massive operations, but do those translate into actual financial strength?
That's the key question, right?
Exactly.
Well, in fiscal year 2024, their revenue clocked in at a staggering RMB 941,168 million.
Hold on, let me grab my calculator. That's what, roughly US $130 billion?
You got it. That top line figure is pretty eye-popping.
It definitely is. But as they say, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. What about their margins? Are they actually making money on all this activity?
Good point. Gotta look deeper than just the revenue number. So their gross profit margin, which is basically the profit after the direct costs of making and selling their goods, sits at around 35%.
Okay, so for every $100 in revenue they're bringing in, they're keeping $35 before accounting for other expenses.
Precisely. So they're not just moving a ton of product, they're actually making a decent profit on each sale.
Got it. But what about all those other expenses? Research and development, marketing, all that good stuff.
Those definitely add up, especially for a company of this scale. Their operating margin, which factors in all those costs, usually hangs out between 10% and 15%.
It's not quite as high as their gross margin, but still pretty healthy.
Exactly. They're running a tight ship.
Right, so we see they're turning a decent chunk of their revenue into operating profit,
Mm-hmm.
but we still have to factor in things like interest and taxes before we get to their bottom line, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
Once you account for all that, their net income margin, which is the ultimate measure of profitability, sits at a respectable 7% to 8%.
So for every $100 in revenue, they're pocketing about $7 or $8 in pure profit. Not too shabby for a company juggling so many different businesses.
Definitely not. But income statements only tell part of the story. We got to check out their balance sheet to see what assets they're holding and how much debt they're carrying.
Right, because the balance sheet gives us a snapshot of their overall financial health.
Exactly. And the first thing that jumps out is their massive asset base over RMB 1.7 trillion.
Whoa, okay, that's a whole lot of zeros. Break it down for me. What exactly makes up those assets?
Well, a big chunk, roughly RMB 500 billion, is in super liquid stuff, cash and cash equivalents, short-term investments, and receivables.
So they've got a nice cushion of assets they can quickly access to cover any short-term obligations.
Exactly. They're not exactly hurting for cash.
That's good to hear. What about their long-term investments? The report mentioned they're pretty actively expanding their ecosystem.
Right, so they've allocated around RMB 200 billion to strategic investments, many of those in other companies.
So they're not just growing organically. They're putting their money to work in other businesses that align with their overall strategy.
And it shows they're committed to growth beyond their core businesses.
Got it. And I'm guessing they've also invested heavily in physical infrastructure, right? All those offices, data centers, logistics facilities.
Absolutely. Their long-term assets, which include all those things, total up to around RMB 185 billion. It's a big commitment, but it reflects their focus on building a solid foundation for future growth.
So we've established they have a healthy mix of liquid assets, strategic investments, and long-term infrastructure. But what about the flip side? What do they owe?
Their liabilities, meaning what they owe to others, come in at around RMB 500 billion.
Okay, so their assets significantly outweigh their liabilities. That's got to be a good sign, right?
It absolutely is. It means they're in a very strong financial position, more than capable of handling their debt obligations. But we can't forget about shareholder equity. That's what's left over after you subtract those liabilities from their assets.
And that's ultimately how we measure the value they've created for their investors.
Exactly. And here's where it gets exciting. Their shareholder equity sits at over RMB 1.2 trillion. That's a huge number.
It really is a testament to their ability to generate value for their shareholders.
But remember, a balance sheet only gives us a static picture. To really understand the dynamics of their business, we got to look at their cash flow statement. That shows us how cash is flowing in and out of the company.
Right. Cash flow is the lifeblood of any business.
And thankfully, Alibaba's got plenty of it.
Yeah.
In fiscal year 2024, their cash flow from operations exceeded RMB 180 billion. That means they're effectively turning their revenue into cold, hard cash.
Impressive. But what are they doing with all that cash? Are they reinvesting it back into the business or returning it to shareholders?
Well, they're doing a bit of both. They're investing a significant chunk into capital expenditures, primarily on property, plant, and equipment to keep fueling their expansion.
Makes sense. You got to spend money to make money.
And they're not shy about rewarding their shareholders. Remember that massive share buyback program we talked about?
The U.S. $40 billion authorization. Oh, yeah. That definitely got my attention.
It's a clear sign they believe their stock is undervalued and they're confident about their long-term prospects.
So by buying back their own shares, they're essentially reducing the number of shares out there, which can boost the value of the remaining shares.
Exactly. It's a common strategy for companies with strong cash flow, and it can be very beneficial for shareholders.
So they're striking a balance between reinvesting for growth and rewarding their investors. But what about dividends? Are they sharing those profits directly with investors?
Historically, their dividend payouts have been pretty modest, but the report hints that they might be considering a more generous dividend policy in the future.
That would be welcome news for investors who are looking for a steady stream of income.
Absolutely. But there's one more crucial metric we need to look at: free cash flow.
Right. Free cash flow is essentially the cash they have left over after paying for their operations and all their investments.
It's the cash they have available to do things like pay dividends, buy back shares, make acquisitions, or just stash away for a rainy day. It's really the ultimate measure of financial flexibility.
So how's Alibaba looking on that front?
Very strong. In fiscal year 2024, their free cash flow topped RMB 130 billion. That's a ton of financial firepower, giving them plenty of options for strategically deploying their capital.
Okay, so we've dissected their income statement, their balance sheet, their cash flow statement, and even their free cash flow. What's our verdict on Alibaba's overall financial health? Are they as solid as they seem?
Well, based on these numbers, they seem to be in very good shape. They're generating massive revenue, converting a healthy portion of it into profit, sitting on a mountain of assets, and churning out tons of free cash flow. They're definitely not perfect, but they've got the financial resources to tackle the challenges ahead.
But as we discussed earlier, they're facing some pretty stiff headwinds, intense competition, geopolitical risks, and an ever-evolving regulatory landscape. So the question is, Can they translate this financial strength into sustained shareholder value?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's not just about having the money, it's about how they use it.
So let's shift gears and take a closer look at their capital allocation strategy. How are they planning to deploy their resources to maximize returns for investors? So we know Alibaba's sitting on a pretty solid financial foundation, but how do they plan to use that to actually create value for their shareholders, especially with all the challenges we talked about?
Well, their capital allocation strategy gives us some clues. They've laid out a pretty clear roadmap for how they're going to deploy their resources.
Okay, fill me in.
Well, first off, there's the share buyback program we discussed earlier. That $40 billion authorization through March 2025 is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it's a clear signal that they believe their stock is undervalued.
Exactly. And by reducing the number of outstanding shares, they can potentially boost the value of each remaining share for investors.
It's a pretty common strategy for companies like Alibaba that have a lot of cash on hand.
Right, especially when they're confident in their long-term growth.
And they're also hinting at the possibility of increasing their dividend payouts, right?
Yeah, the report suggests they might be moving towards a more generous dividend policy, which would be great for income-focused investors.
So they're trying to appeal to both growth investors and income investors. Makes sense.
It's a balanced approach. But let's be real, the landscape is changing rapidly. What do you think are the biggest factors that will determine Alibaba's success moving forward?
Well, competition is definitely heating up. They're facing pressure from all sides. Established players, hungry startups, even global giants trying to muscle their way into the market.
Yeah, no one can afford to stand still in this industry.
But Alibaba does have some serious advantages, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Their massive user base, their sophisticated technology platform, their deep understanding of the Chinese consumer, all huge assets.
But they can't just rely on those advantages forever. They need to keep innovating and adapting.
For sure. And the regulatory landscape in China is another big question mark. The government's focus on data privacy, antitrust, content moderation, it's all adding another layer of complexity for them.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act. They got to stay on the right side of regulators while still pushing boundaries and innovating.
And then there's always the looming shadow of geopolitical risks, especially the tensions between the US and China.
Yeah, that's a wild card that could have a major impact on their business.
Trade restrictions, increased scrutiny, even the threat of being delisted from US stock exchanges. It's all on the table.
Definitely some serious challenges to navigate. But let's not forget about Alibaba's strengths.
True, their track record of innovation is pretty remarkable. They've got a lot of smart people working for them, and their ecosystem is vast and interconnected.
It's not easy to replicate what they've built.
And they're also pouring resources into future technologies like AI and cloud computing.
Do you think those bets could be the key to maintaining their dominance?
Potentially, AI and cloud are definitely areas where they could become global leaders.
So, while there are definitely some bumps in the road ahead, Alibaba seems pretty well equipped to handle them. They've got the financial resources, the innovative spirit, the strategic vision.
Yeah, they're a company to watch.
It's like we've only scratched the surface of their story today. We've talked about their diverse business segments, their impressive financials, their ambitious plans for the future.
And it's all happening against this backdrop of major global shifts. The rise of China, the digital revolution, the growing focus on sustainability.
It's a fascinating story with global implications.
Definitely keeps things interesting.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a question. Do you think Alibaba can maintain its position as a leader and shape the future of e-commerce and technology?
It's something to think about. Consider their strengths, the challenges they face, their vision for the future.
It'll be interesting to see how their story unfolds.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, keep learning, keep exploring, keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Alibaba.
Until next time.